Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another of our sessions on AI and archival practice, a series of videos that are being produced under the auspices of ICA's Program Commission and with the very kind support of the National Library and Archives of the UAE. And for this session today, we're drilling down on the area of description, having a discussion about description and looking at how AI might be usefully applied to that aspect of the archivist's work. To do that, I'm very pleased to be joined by three of our ICA project team. Hi, Kit, it's good to have you with us. Hello, Moises, good to see you. And Luis Esteve, hi, hello, welcome to you all. So look, let's kick this off then by having a listen to a recording that I made with Adrian Cunningham, as one of our experts within the ICA family, an expert on archival description, and just listen to some of the thoughts that Adrian had on description generally in archives and how AI might be applied to that field of archival work. Well, welcome, Adrian. It's great to have you join us for our sessions on AI and archival practice. Really, you've had this long history in the development of descriptive standards and looking into different ways and methods of description, including the very formative ICA REC and the ISO 16175 that it turned into. Look, maybe you could just quickly bring us up to date. What are you doing right now in terms of ongoing development of descriptive standards?
Yes, thank you, David, and very nice to talk to you. And thank you for extending me the invitation. So in terms of what I'm doing right now, I guess there's two things that I'm involved in that are relevant to this discussion. The first is for about the last 12 years or more, I've been a member of the ICA Experts Group on Archival Description, which is a wonderful group of people chaired by Daniel Pitti of America. And that's the group that's been responsible for developing the records in contexts conceptual model and the ontology that supports that, and also a separate product called Introduction to Archival Description. So those three products were released about 6 months ago by the ICA in their final form after kicking around in various draft forms for a while. And what the experts group is now working on is the application guidelines. So that'll take us, I think, probably a year or 18 months to develop, but that's currently what we're working on. So that's one thing, and the other hat that I wear is I'm the head of the Australian delegation to the ISO Archives and Records Management Committee, which is ISO TC 46 SC 11, and I wear two hats on that committee because I'm also actually the ICA liaison to that committee, and in fact it's a two-way liaison. I liaise back to the ICA from ISO, but I also liaise to ISO from the ICA, so I'm that sort of conduit of communication. And within that committee, the particular responsibility I have is I chair the metadata working group of SC11, and that working group is the owner of the ISO 23081 suite of standards, metadata for records. That exists in three parts. There's about to be released a fourth part, which will be a technical report, which is a bit of a study on what metadata element sets have been developed that are consistent with ISO 23081. So look out for that. That'll be released probably later this year, subject to balloting, etc. And those of you who are familiar with ISO 23081 will know that the suite's been around for quite some time now. It's effectively probably 15 years old. So we've actually started a process. We met in Berlin a few weeks ago, and one of the resolutions that came out of that meeting was that a small group of us within our working group has commenced or was about to commence preliminary work on revising that entire suite, modernising it, consolidating it, etc. So that'll take us a few years, but and we've got a roadmap which we've agreed upon, which will guide us on that work. So really they're the two things. Now they're both actually kind of related, because they're both the committees that I'm on are looking at effectively developing metadata standards, metadata frameworks for describing records. The 23081 is coming at it more from the records creator or the records creation environment in a records management sense. So obviously when records are captured and managed in record systems in creating organisations, metadata is accumulated at that point, and the aim of 23081 is to help guide systems developers and implementers and records managers with what kind of metadata should they be capturing at that point. RIC, records in context, is kind of coming at it from the archival end, which is, when records are transferred to an archives or need to be described by an archival program, what's the framework for capturing that information. But effectively, it's the same information we're talking about. It's just a question of at what point in the journey of the records is this information created and captured, and how might it get reused later for different purposes, etc. So in many respects, the two standards ought to be as harmonised as possible, because metadata captured in a records management system should then travel with records through into an archival system, and that metadata should then get reused in the context of archival description, with the archivist then adding some extra layers of context and analysis to help people outside of the immediate context of creation and use in those records.
Yeah. So look, just that very brief dissertation, if you like, on the work and the scope of work that's going on into description does indicate that at one level it can be seen as quite a simple thing. Because, people outside the profession might say, okay, you're developing, cataloguing records or doing a finding aid or something, but there's a lot involved in here. And so again, you're one of the very few go-to people I could think of to start unpacking all of this. Because Adrian, what we're looking at in this series of discussions is artificial intelligence, AI technology, which can mean so much to so many people. And if we start just jumping in to talk about technology, we'll be dazzled by the shiny new technologies and the flashing lights and the trickery of it all. But I'd really love to hear from you being so deeply immersed in the complexities and the possibilities of description for archival collections. What are those sort of major transformations in description that we should be looking for in a relatively new technology like AI? What are the big transformations do you think that AI technology could bring to the archivist who is faced with the challenge of describing a collection, be it large, small, digital, or even analog?
Yeah, okay. Well, look, I'm quite excited and optimistic about the potential for AI in this space, because from an archival perspective, the perennial challenge with archival description has always been and will always be the fact that there are too many records and not enough archivists.
Yes.
So, archivists are used to dealing with large volumes of material. That's sort of part of our DNA, and we don't usually get overwhelmed to the point of being, feeling like we're failures or whatever. We are used to dealing with large volumes of records, but it's still daunting. archival programs are generally underfunded. People with archival training and skills are not necessarily all that easy to come by, at least in my part of the world. There's a skills shortage there. Yet there's billions and billions of records out there, not all of which need to be preserved permanently in archives, but a lot do. And when you look at the sheer volume of records that come within the purview of archival programs, that we're all used to having backlogs, and we're all used to having warehouses full of stuff that one day we might get around to properly describing, creating finding aids for, etc. So I think the great potential for AI is to help us do a lot of the heavy lifting there when it comes to scaling that massive mountain of records that need to be properly described, with only a handful of trained archivists to actually do the work.
Yeah, and the volume, and what are the I suppose what's the expert qualities of AI that we'd be looking for in if we were going to unleash a piece of software essentially across a huge heap, if you like, of evaluated undescribed records? What are that higher order of thinking or intelligence that we're going to be looking for in AI? What are some of the sophisticated decisions that would need to be made, do you think?
Yeah, well, look, when you look at archival materials, increasingly, of course, a lot of it's already in digital form. So if it's textual, it can be analysed by machines. If it's analog, then you can use optical character recognition, scanning, or whatever to get it into machine readable form. And even if it's image-based or moving image or sound files or whatever, increasingly these days technology, if it's in digital form, technology can analyze that through machine learning and that sort of thing. So you can point AI technology at these large bodies of material and ask them to make sense of that stuff and to come back with hopefully useful descriptions. But to do that, you need, I think, benchmarks or exemplars of what might constitute good description, or what's an agreed framework for structuring those descriptions, and the larger the body of kind of reference material that the AI technology can use as its starting point, the better the quality of the output's going to be. And then it then becomes an iterative process of, you look at the output from an AI experiment, you look at some of the shortcomings, and then feedback loops. The great thing about AI technology is it learns from its mistakes, or it ought to be able to learn from its mistakes and do better the second time round, and even better the third and fourth time round, etc. So be prepared to iteratively experiment, not necessarily expect perfection, but hey, an imperfect body of description of material that you were never going to get around to describing anyway is better than nothing.
Yeah.
So
So is with the and I mean, yeah, you have to agree with that to have some form of description at least opens the collection up and allows people to get started analysing it. Have you seen any trends lately in terms of where once we would have had a very kind of programmatic, highly regulated approach to description? If you could see that, in the analog world, you could see the file cover, you would know the controlling agency or the source of the document, you would see the file title, and various other sort of measurements you could, quantitative information you could put in description. But these days, are we looking for more sort of nuanced descriptions? I'm thinking in terms of different ways of describing records that may be more appropriate to sort of cultural beliefs or apply to different, sectors of the community, or in the case of migrated archives, it would have a different meaning. Have you seen any sort of new complexities that archivists face now in terms of, being responsible and ethical in the way that descriptions are done, that we might be asking AI to sort of address as well?
Yeah, well, complexity and archival description and record keeping metadata, those things go hand in hand, I think. I mean, one of the things I've often said about metadata for records is, there's lots of kinds of metadata around in the world, but compared to most categories of metadata that people might be familiar with, metadata for records is orders of magnitude more complex than anything else I can think of. And it's because you've got all this contextual information that needs to be identified, managed in some kind of coherent way, fact-checked, etc., etc. So it's quite. So that's why when you look at things like ISO 23081 and RIC, if you come at them cold, and if you just use the metadata standards like Dublin Core, for instance, and then you look at 23081 or you look at RIC, it blows your mind, really, because suddenly it's way more complicated than anything you might have expected in a metadata environment. But that's because the real world is complicated. The real world in which records are made, kept, and used is a very dynamic and complex and contingent place. There's not ever going to be one canonical way of describing records. There's always going to be validity to a multiplicity of perspectives, numerous pathways to nirvana, etc. So that complexity is a given, but it's easy to be kind of paralyzed by it almost, because you look at that complexity and you think, oh, where the hell do I start?
I mean, do you see that I often wonder about this as well, that if technology gets so advanced that the researcher will come to a collection of archives with a question in mind, and if every piece of that collection had been digitized and analyzed, etc., I mean, what's the long-term value of description? Should it be described on demand, if you like? The researcher poses the question, and then the technology at that moment in time, with that those contextual values, etc., at that time, go ahead and search the collection for what they want. I mean, are we ever going to get to that point, or what's the long-term value of an archivist's expertise in having a collection described, do you think, as opposed to just a big Google search that a researcher would kick off over a collection?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, this takes me back, to the 1990s when people first started saying to me, well, look, if everything is full text searchable, why do you even need metadata or description? But it's a good question, but the answer to that is that, in fact, not all the answers are going to be in the content of a record. A lot of the answers, or a lot of the need to know kind of stuff, will actually be in the context of the records, which won't be full text searchable. You're going to have to go out and find that stuff, and it'll be in metadata in some form or other out there. So that's why you need the kind of descriptions we're talking about. Full text searching is always going to be a blunt instrument. It's got its place. If you're looking for a needle in a haystack and a full text search engine's going to find it for you, then great. But that's not the only reason why records are kept and used. And it's not the only reason why archival description is necessary either. Archival description is one of the uses of archival description is to help people discover things in archival collections, for sure, but it's not the only reason why we describe archives. We describe archives so that when someone finds something, they can make sense of it. So it's not just a discovery tool; it's a sense-making tool, and it's also an authenticity and integrity tool as well, because particularly in an era of deep fakery, etc., you need to have some level of confidence that a record is what it purports to be, and that it hasn't been tampered with, etc. And again, the metadata and the archival description is an important part of the network of guarantees of authenticity and integrity. So, and also in an archival program, you need that descriptive information just to manage your holdings. If you're dealing with 50 shelf kilometers of analog records and innumerable terabytes of digital records, you've got to manage that stuff, and you need a system that will manage that stuff for you. And those systems are metadata systems. Without the metadata, you simply can't manage your holdings. So there's a variety of purposes for which this metadata is created and retained and deployed. And in terms of this sort of never-ending journey that you're alluding to, I would quote our Australian colleague Sue McCamish from Monash University, who wrote many years ago that records are always in a state of becoming. Now that's an interesting concept to try and unpick, because on the one hand we talk about records needing fixity, and once the record is captured, you shouldn't be tampering with it or changing it, etc. But as the record travels through time and across domains of use, the understandings and uses that those records are put to are ever evolving, ever changing, very dynamic, and in that sense, the record, and more particularly the descriptive information that surrounds the record, is always in a state of becoming. So you never, in our world now, you never get to the point where you can say, oh, okay, that stuff is adequately described, I never need to look at it again. No, your archival descriptions are always temporary. They're always in a state of evolution. There's always room for additional context to be added, updated, or additional perspectives to be added in. You mentioned ethics. So one of the ethical dilemmas that archivists are grappling with in Australia particularly, but in other settler societies, is the ethics of managing records of the experiences of Indigenous people. Archives are inherently kind of Eurocentric institutions with a suite of Eurocentric kind of tools and professional frameworks that we brought to bear on our professional practice. But when they collide with a whole different cultural worldview, you have all sorts of ethical dilemmas that arise. And in the field of description, of course, the descriptive information that would be captured in legacy systems is would often be highly insulting and very colonial, if you like, yes, in their mindsets. And so being able to acknowledge that, but provide alternative frameworks for constructing description, for allowing non-archivists into the descriptive process through crowdsourcing, etc. All of those things have been underway now for some years in archival programs, but we've still got a long way to go, I think, in terms of opening up multiple perspectives in the field of archival description. In Australia, we talk about things like parallel provenance, where the the provenance, which is basically the context of records, the contextual relationships that surround records, it's an infinite thing, and it's an ever-changing thing. As time goes on, the provenance today will be different in 20 or 30 years' time, because there'll be different contexts in which those records are kept and used. So having flexible descriptive frameworks that accommodate and are hospitable to those multiple perspectives are important. It sounds scary and it sounds daunting, and we've only really begun the journey, but it's an exciting journey, and we've got a long way to go, and we'll never actually complete it either, I don't think.
Look, this is wonderful. This is a perfect segue into, I suppose, the other thing that I really wanted to talk to you about was, for me, listening to you talk then, Adrian, it really did hammer home to me that the work of the archivist is as much about looking forward at what society requires of us. We're always planning for the next generation. We're working for clients that haven't been born yet. But of course, our work is tied up with records documenting the past. And this is the very thing for me, is that AI technology, of course, is about learning from what already exists, training on documents that are already there, and practices of the past, whereas the archivist is constantly evolving and changing the way we do things. What do you think, if an archivist listening to these sessions right now, what advice do you have for how people in the archival profession should be preparing themselves to take advantage of this new technology and to be more effective, more proactive in the archival field in the future?
Yeah, look, well, going back to your initial question about, what are the big challenges we need to solve, and I focused initially on the sheer bulk of records and that need to be described. That's one challenge. But the other challenge I think I'd highlight is there's I've observed over the last 20 odd years that there's an implementation gap between the beautiful standards that people like my committees develop and the actual professional practices in archival programs. So a couple of years ago, I think the ICA did a survey, a global survey of archives to find out, well, what standards for archival description were people actually implementing, and the results of that survey were sobering, to say the least. What we found was that maybe 30 or 40% of archives had gone some of the way towards implementing ISAB-G, but that's about it. And in terms of implementation of other standards, maybe there's some local, in particular countries, there might be particular standards. Like in Canada, there's been RAD for a number of years, and in the United States there's been DAX. So there's been some implementation of those standards, but when I look at ISO 23081, when I look at RIC, and now it's early days for RIC because it's only just been released, but nevertheless, bridging that gap between these beautiful but somewhat complex and scary standards and actual practices and actual archives is a challenge. Now, I think software developers have a role to play here. So people who are developing archival management software, records management software, getting those people to be aware of, understand, and support metadata standards in the software products that they develop will then help the average practitioner, because they will then have software that actually will do a lot of the heavy lifting for them, and all they've got to do is direct traffic, put the metadata in the right place, do a bit of quality assurance, etc., etc. But we do have a long way to go with bridging that implementation gap, and I think AI can actually help with that. Now it's early days with this, and at the moment, all that's really happening, I think, is there's a few interesting research projects. Like I know the latest iteration of the Inter Pares Global Research Project is looking at AI. They're looking at it more from a, how do you guarantee the authenticity of AI-generated stuff, which is a whole interesting set of questions. But there's also a subset of that research project, which I believe is looking at things like RIC and how might RIC be leveraged to using AI technology to deliver better record keeping and archival outcomes. So there's some interesting research projects going on, and I think it would be good for the more progressive archivists to get actively involved as industry partners, etc., in those research projects and reap the benefits of them. Some of the software vendors, I think, are dipping their toe in the AI water as well. So I know a company in Switzerland called Archipanion that's doing some interesting work with machine learning and AI for generating archival metadata. But yeah, it's early days yet. We don't yet kind of mature off-the-shelf software solutions that an archival practitioner can pick and choose from. But they need, I would encourage all archivists, A, to be familiar with the standards, and B, to keep an eye out on what interesting things are going on in the sort of software and research space, because I think, in 5 or 10 years' time, there will be some really exciting AI solutions that are out there that will make the jobs of the average archivist a whole lot easier in terms of scaling some of these mountains we've been talking about.
So thank you so very much, and really appreciated the discussion. Thanks.
Very welcome. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Well, that was a very interesting tour of the horizon, if you like, on archival description. Moises, what are some of the key takeaway messages that you got from that?
Oh, hi, David. So one thing, one interesting point I would like to highlight is the idea that although AI can facilitate the description process, especially in terms of volume, it will not replace the role of the archivist. So Adrian mentioned that the value of an archivist lies in making sense of the records and ensure their integrity and authenticity. So this is something that AI, no matter how advanced, cannot fully achieve, particularly in ethical and cultural contexts. Therefore, the ideal use of AI would be a collaborative tool doing let's say, the hard work, but always guided by a human judgment. That's my opinion.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very interesting point you're making there, and I think Adrian's words were that description is a sense-making tool, making sense of not more than just text searching of records, but looking at the sense of the aggregation of the records. The context is where many answers are to be found. Context more than content. So no, I thought that was a very interesting aspect of that discussion. Kit, what were your thoughts?
I think I would just like to add on to what Moses said as well. I think a lot of people do feel that AI in application in archive context, I think description may be the highest hope in terms of AI application, and we do see a lot of development in that. But I think what Adrian's presentation actually sort of reinforces is really, at the end of the day, there's still a lot of the professional involvement, the need to go back to the basics, that we have to make sure that the metadata are captured correctly, documented, and a lot of metadata not just exist within the content, but the contextual information that may be coming from different kind of sources also matters. And AI alone may help with the description process, but it's not only solution, and we do still need the professional involvement as well. So I think that is a sort of still saying that yes, at the end of the day, it's still a lot of professional knowledge that has contributed to that. So yeah, so that's, to me, is important in that sense, because I think we always think of AI being able to come up with things itself. But I think at the end of the day, if we don't have the accurate metadata upstream, downstream AI can also not do what we need it to do as well.
Yeah, no, very well said. Thank you. Luis Esteve, your thoughts?
Thanks, David. Well, I think one of the, for me, main issues that Adrian, or the presentation of Adrian, we can extract is, for me, it's very positive, because in general, all the AI solutions are applied in a reactive way. So I think the potential of enrichment of the descriptions with metadata open the door to apply them in the creation process, so in the offices really. So this could improve a lot all the process, the cycle of the description, and also for example, to apply the standards. So when he commented that the results of the application of standards are in general more or poorer that we thought some years ago, for example. So I think the basics of description could be applied very well with AI solutions. And finally, so that means also a better access to the granularity of information for users, for example, linked to the records in context proposal. So I think it's a very, very positive presentation, and we need to digest a little more, because there are a lot of information there.
No, that's very true. You know, I must admit, I was reminded how complicated description is as a task. It's conceptually it's very simple, you know, to go through the records and to come up with, to fill in some forms and describe them. But with the way that standards are being developed, as Adrian pointed out, and you've just said, Luis Esteve, it's can be disheartening sometimes to realize how infrequently the full standards are being applied. I wonder, do you think AI, just following up your points there, Lucy, do you think AI is a mechanism to make it easier to apply standards? Well, did you get from that discussion that AI might automate sort of the application of standards?
Well, I think standards could be very easy or very complex. So one of the problems to apply the standards is mainly in the new large volumes of digital records, or in the past yes. Records in paper. So in paper, it will not be a solution, sure. However, I think the standards could be very easy or very complex. So the essential point of the standard is a common rules or aspects that they can be shared along all the profession. So because it's more in the international context, that is very different in a national context standard, for example, that it could be applied in Catalonia, but not in France or not in Spain. So some standards, I think, could be a very good way, but it's necessary to define the minimum requirements. So I think in some cases we are lost in transition, because we try to do, of course, our best, but in some cases it's not necessary.
Yeah, I totally agree with Luis' words, because there's some difference, local and regional difference, that can impact in the description, and to adapt AI technologies on that this is a big challenge in the end of the day.
Yeah, Very interesting. Well, look, I should probably leave it there. I'm sorry, Kit, did you have something?
Yeah,
Yes,
I
please.
think I just want to add on. I think I really like the point in Adrian's presentation about the implementation gap. Because I realized that it's really a real issue in implementing standards and hoping for AI software to help with the description in our work environment. Because I think understanding the standard and being able to articulate it and put it in a system is one thing. I think there's complexity and also the local context and the sort of consideration, as I think both Louise and Moses had pointed out. But I think what Adrian sort of alluded to was also the point that there's software out there that may help with the description, that use AI to help with description, but it also needs to be sort of within with the archival sort of understanding and also awareness to be able to sort of craft that. So I'm also thinking of how, like, no doubt there are software out there, how can those people working with, or the AI professional, really understand what we need in our archive and make sure that they can sort of within our needs within it. Because I think like we are trying out something in our local context, but even trying to get our tech counterparts to understand what exactly is why are we so particular about a certain standard or how a certain font is being described. I think they don't see why is that necessary, or why there's a certain way that we need to have controlled vocabulary. Why can't we just leave it for maybe there's AI to generate it? But I think we still need some control, and how to bridge that kind of communication gaps or implementation gap that Adrian had pointed it out. I think it is essential. That's why I think it's all the point that it reinforces the point that I think as professionals in the archive, we need to be also aware and getting familiar and comfortable with AI as well, so that we can talk the same language with the AI professionals, so that we understand them and they understand us, so we can come to a common consensus one day. Thanks.
Yeah. Look, I think that's very well said. And I think that's a very good point to close our discussion on, Kit. So thanks everyone, and thanks again to Adrian for his time, and the three of you for bringing it all together into those key messages. So thank you. And look, for our viewers as well, we'll have the resources and the references to those standards and those other things that we discussed during today's session up on the screen. And we'll also have online resources available for those who would like to follow up on some of the issues and topics raised during this session. So once again, thank you everybody. It's been a really good discussion, and yes, thank you all.